So, welcome everybody. My name's Scott Pipkin. I'm the Director of Education and Engagement at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, and we're thrilled to be partnering with Santa Barbara Audubon Society. We have a couple of representatives here, Jessie Altstatt, who is the chair of the Santa Barbara Audubon Society Conservation Science Committee, and Mark Holmgren, who is a member of that committee, and also has served as the curator of the vertebrate collections at UCSB's Cheadle Center for Biodiversity and Ecological Restoration from 1984 to 2010. Mark is one of the esteemed birders of our community and has a huge hand in the breeding bird study itself. So, I think the way this is going to work is I'm going to wait for the chopper to pass by,
Sorry.
and then I'm going to share just a little bit of kind of garden related information and maybe set the table as to why and how this collaboration is working for Bird Month. And then I'll hand it over to Jesse and Mark to take it from there. So I will share my screen, and I just have a couple slides here. Can folks see my screen?
No.
You can see that you're sharing, but nothing is,
There we go.
Just thinking about it.
yeah.
All right. And I have to confess, you may notice that bird and that plant may look unfamiliar if you're from Southern California. This is actually a photo from Arizona. This is a Plumbeus vireo nesting in, I believe, Quercus hypoleucoides. But it's one of my favorite bird nesting photos that I've taken, so I couldn't help myself. Um, but real quick, just reminding everybody who Santa Barbara Botanic Garden is. Uh, we were founded 99 years ago as the first United States botanic garden dedicated to native plants. Our garden's work has always been at the nexus of conservation, research, horticulture, and education, which I think is a pretty unique and special place to be. And just in terms of the home gardener, we've introduced over 30 horticultural varieties of plants. Many of these introductions have been horticultural selections. So these are plants that exhibit interesting traits in the wild in a particular population that horticulturalists then take and propagate because of those traits. One example is Salvia avis keaty, the Avis keaty hummingbird sage, which is a population of hummingbird sage that a volunteer from the garden found in the foothills of Santa Barbara. And instead of having magenta flowers, it has yellow flowers. And it's been introduced as a horticultural variety. I'm actually very curious to do a little study on whether hummingbirds find it as attractive as the regular hummingbird sage, which has that red colored flower, which we often associate with hummingbird attraction. So, anyway, we've been doing this for a really long time because there's a recognition that native plants are at the foundation of a healthy ecosystem. And that's something we'll talk about in just a moment. 99-year organization. We're working on our centennial celebrations right now. And as we enter our 100th year, we have some kind of revised goals that we're really trying to achieve in this critical time. And one is we'd like to see 30% native plant coverage in the communities where we live, work, and play. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why we care so much about native plant habitat in a moment. We want to maintain that biodiversity. California has over 6,500 plants in its flora. About a third of those are endemic to California. And so the evolutionary relationships between those plants and the organisms of our ecosystem is extremely important. And we really want to inspire a new generation. And this doesn't necessarily mean a future generation. Everybody here can be part of this new generation of conservation leaders. You don't have to be a 12-year-old to be part of that new generation. You can be any age. But why the connection between plants and birds? So here's just a little basic ecology as a refresher. And this is a reminder we have this thing called a trophic pyramid. And this is a representation of energy in an ecosystem. And almost all of the energy on our planet comes from the sun. And at the bottom of this pyramid, we have our autotrophs, which are largely our plants, but also cyanobacteria, algae, and other organisms that photosynthesize. But they convert that sun's energy into sugar. And they can only convert so much of that energy into sugar that becomes bioavailable to other organisms. So that's why this diagram has a pyramid shape, because less and less energy becomes available as you go higher up in the pyramid. And that's one reason you don't see bobcats everywhere. There are only a handful of bobcats in the system because there's only so much energy that's now available to them based on the energy that's been converted to the sun, transferred to herbivorous organisms, transferred to the organisms that eat the herbivorous organisms, and then transferred again to the top of the pyramid. And so the idea is that we want the biggest base of the pyramid that we can have. And the pyramid in California and in Southern California, the foundation is our native plants, which create these habitats that provide all of the opportunities for diverse life to thrive. And hence the relationship between native plants and birds. And this is why Bird Month is an important celebration for us at the Botanic Garden. And this is why we've been doing this. I think this is the third or maybe the fourth year we've partnered with Santa Barbara Audubon Society is to highlight this relationship between plants and birds. So, as a reminder, in particular, insects, so that next step up in the trophic pyramid, represent about half of the world's biodiversity. And a quarter to a third of that half, so about 15% of the entire Earth's biodiversity, is herbivorous insects. And herbivorous insects are bird food. So about 96% of songbirds feed their young a diet that consists 100% of arthropods, so invertebrates, largely insects. About 70% of our songbirds eat insects as adults, and about half of that is Lepidoptera, largely in the form of caterpillars. And in particular, the relationship with that order Lepidoptera and plants is really tight because many lepidopterans are monophagous. That means they have one food source. So think about monarch butterflies. They need milkweed as larvae, otherwise, they will not metamorphosize into adults. So many of the lepidopterans, the butterflies and moths, are monophagous. They need one larval host plant in order to survive. That means there are very tight evolutionary relationships between these lepidopterans, which represent about 50% of our songbirds' diet, and native plants. And hence, this is just food. This has nothing to do with, nesting habitat or roosting or many of these other aspects of a bird's life history that plants are critical to. But the feeding, the energy source, is extremely linked to the vegetation of the area. And this is why this partnership between the Botanic Garden and Santa Barbara Audubon Society is so important. And hopefully, this will tee up the rest of the discussion about how we can make our homes more bird friendly, how we can observe bird breeding behavior in our homes, what are the signs, and then how we record those observations so we can better understand the trends over time and better manage our habitats. So with that, I will shut up and pass it along to Jessie Altstatt, who, as I mentioned, is the chair of the Conservation Science Committee at Santa Barbara Audubon Society, longtime member of the Santa Barbara Audubon Society board, and a major champion of nature, natural spaces, and ecology in our community for many years now. So I'm pleased to present Jessie Altstadt now.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And I just wanted to say I noticed that we've got our Santa Barbara Audubon board president, Janice Levashef, on the call. And we also have Paige Hiller Adams, who's also a board member. So I just want to say welcome to them. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. So bear with me. I've got a bunch of things going on that I'm going to toggle back and forth between. Um, and sorry, give me a second. So you have to tell me whether you now see my presentation. Did that work?
Affirmative.
Okay, so good. I don't want you to look at my all the windows I have open in the background. All right, well, we're really excited to talk a little bit about birds. I promise we're not going to go the entire time, although if I'd actually loaded up all the photos that I found earlier, we probably would go later than 8. So we're going to spare you a little bit. But I'm here tonight with Mark Holmgren, one of my mentors from long ago, my days at UCSB. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys about birds. So just quickly, these are some of the subjects we're going to go over. We've done introductions briefly. Native plants, I'm going to talk very quickly about native plants. We're going to talk about the breeding season overview, what birds require for success, threats, what does breeding behavior look like, how, when, where to observe, some tips, what does breeding sound like? I have a few audio clips in here as well. And then we're going to move into the second part of the demonstration or the presentation this evening, which is the bird breeding study demonstration. And so we'll go over how to enter data and then how to query the database, as Mark was showing us at the beginning before we got started. And then we'll have time for questions along the way too. So as Scott mentioned at the beginning, plants are extremely essential for birds as food, also for shelter, but birds are heavily adapted to the type of vegetation that they are associated with. And you know, what's interesting too is what I'm just thinking about now is that a lot of the we have both resident birds that are here year round, and then we also have migratory birds that come to our area to breed during the summer months, the late spring and summer months. Well, those birds winter down in to the south of us, either in Mexico or Central America, or you know, as far as South America. And when you're thinking about birds being adapted to certain types of vegetation, they have to be adapted to our kind of coastal Mediterranean climate, and also to the dry jungles and kind of forests that they inhabit in Central and South America. And I just was thinking about that when I think about how adaptable birds are, especially given our changes in along developed areas and the kind of tropical and non-native vegetation that a lot of yards are landscaped with. That might seem unfamiliar for birds, but then that might actually be, some of those plants might be plants that the birds are experiencing when they're outside of breeding season during the winter. So it's just something to consider. As Scott mentioned earlier, the dietary needs of birds are going to depend on what they're doing, where they are, what species they are, and of course, the timing in their reproductive cycle. So I'm just going to show a few pictures here, the types of plants that birds would look towards for food resource. And I'm a little embarrassed. I've forgotten the names of these plants now because I'm not really a plant person. Scott, you want to chime in? Is this a Phacelia on the left?
Yeah, yeah, it looks like a Phacelia. I'm not sure. It might be Imbricata.
Yeah, I took this picture around the somewhere in Mission Canyon, and then on the right we have a grass that has seeds, and so a lot of times throughout the year you'll see birds kind of up in the vegetation picking, and basically they're going after seeds like this. We also have nectaring plants such as the island malva on the left, really beautiful plant. I have several in my yard. I really recommend them if you're looking for something for landscaping. Mine have flowers year round. This particular plant actually came from a rock off of Santa Catalina Island. But I believe the garden, do you guys sell these? Do you have malvas at the Botanic Garden?
We typically do. Yeah, I don't know if they're in stock at the moment, but yeah, it is a plant that we carry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great plant. Mine's about 8 feet tall and it was filled with bees today. And then on the right, we have hummingbird sage, which is very popular with hummingbirds and is still in bloom. It's kind of an early spring, um, kind of moisture habitat plant, at least where I've found it, but popular plants. But then what we are really interested now, this time of year, when we're getting into nesting season for birds, is we're interested in the service that the plants provide for attracting insects, because most of a large amount of the dietary budget for birds during breeding season ends up being bugs, caterpillars, larvae, and that's because of the high protein source, high fat and high protein that will help their nestlings grow quickly. And here's a couple more pictures. You'll often see birds flying and just kind of picking along a leaf, and you might think, well, what are they doing? In my yard, I'm very thankful for the bush tits that come through and they eat the aphids off a lot of my kale, my other plants. And then often you see birds picking spiders, and actually hummingbirds use spider nests for their, I'm sorry, spider webs for their nests. So that's a very important resource for the birds. So, what do birds actually look for when they're looking at plants for nesting? And I should just say too, there are some species of birds seem to be pretty faithful to particular trees that they want to nest in. Others seem to be a little more opportunistic, but they all share these kind of basic tenets. They need a structure that they can build their nest into, or maybe the nest is included somehow in the structure of that plant already, such as a hole or a crevice. They need privacy. So, and this isn't just that they don't want to be seen and they don't want to be found. And this is, it's not just by us, it's by other visual predators such as cats, crows, other birds that might be looking to eat their eggs or their nestlings. And then finally, the nest has to be fairly accessible for areas that supply food and water, because the bird can't be expending too much of its own energy flying back and forth from the nest to its foraging grounds. And this is actually, this can be kind of a problem. Well, I'm just going to mention, I live in Goleta, and we are having, we've had a lot of development on open spaces, and unfortunately, open spaces are where a lot of our small mammals live, such as ground squirrels, gophers, and those are prey for foraging raptors, such as hawks. So red-shouldered hawks, red-tailed hawks, and then occasionally white-tailed kites also are looking for these small mammal prey. But development has just changed the availability of those mammals, because we don't have as many kind of open grasslands as we used to, even just a few years ago. And so the birds, the large birds that are looking for those mammals, have to fly farther and farther, and eventually they just don't have the capacity to be able to feed a family, and having to fly potentially miles in either direction to look for prey. So that's really kind of it's a major point right there. And along that point, I want to say that in one of the open spaces that I do go birding in a lot, somebody dumps a bunch of bird seed out, which attracts sparrows, but unfortunately it also attracts the Cooper's hawks that eat the sparrows. And a few years ago, the Cooper's hawks, each year they were moving their nest closer and closer to where the bird seed gets dumped, until finally they had their nest in an oak tree immediately adjacent. So the bird didn't have to fly anywhere. She would just drop down from her nest and grab a sparrow and go right back up. So, I mean, birds are smart, they're figuring it out as best they can. Okay, this, oops, sorry. it's a little obstructed in my view at the top. This is looking at when birds nest. And so this is a graph that Mark had generated from the bird breeding study, looking at over 12,000 records throughout the year. And so you see it's a really nice bell curve. And I would say just looking at this, it's kind of like the peak nesting and breeding, though I should say breeding activity, because nesting is just one part of breeding. But the chief breeding activity seems to be kind of from, like mid-March through the end of July. But if you look, there actually are records for early January going all the way up throughout the year, actually, although they do taper off in September. The reason why this is important is because there are there's some guidance that our public agencies need to adhere to for when certain types of construction work or tree work or other things that might potentially disrupt bird breeding that can happen. So basically there's something, called breeding season or nesting season. Typically that is said to be the middle of February through the end of August. However, you'll see that, we do have birds before that and birds after that. A lot of our raptors, red-tailed hawks especially, start pairing up in the winter, and you'll see them flying together and doing courtship and picking nest sites. So this is one of the reasons why Audubon really pushes for not doing any major vegetation removal or tree trimming activities during these months, from February through August. And if it's going to be a large tree, then that tree really needs to be inspected, even if it's outside of those months, just to make sure that there's not already a raptor set up in it. Okay, so what can we do kind of in our urban landscape to help birds nest successfully? And really kind of the number one thing is they really just want to be left alone. They don't want us bugging them. They don't want us, setting up a nest cam and poking around, seeing if the eggs have hatched, if we can even find the nest. They really just want to be undisturbed and undetected. And because of that, it actually makes it kind of difficult for us to track them down. And so I'll be giving you some tips a little later on how you can do that. Another thing to really think about in the urban environment is our pets that share our homes and yards, and then those wild animals that are attracted to our lives and our behavior. So loose dogs, and I've had a dog in the past that had grabbed a fledgling towhee from my yard, and I was devastated when it happened. So I just want to say I know it happens. Cats. It's estimated in the US to kill, 4 billion birds a year. I mean, it's an insane number of birds. Rats also are a major problem. Crows come in if we leave our garbage uncovered, and even if we don't. So there's a lot of things that we humans do that makes it harder for birds, even if we're providing a good environment with good plants in our yard. And then I think the last thing I was going to say about this is that we have to consider the timing of how long it takes kind of the average bird to do the reproductive cycle. They're pretty fast, but they still need, I think the minimum is going to be a month and a half to 2 months, because they have to, depending on which species it is, they have to select a site to build a nest. They have to lay eggs, and so the females will lay 1 egg each day, maybe skipping a day, but they'll lay until they have a clutch of anywhere from 2 to 5 eggs, depending on what type of bird it is. And then they incubate those eggs for a period of anywhere from 12 to 3 weeks, depending on the type of bird, or maybe longer. And then they have to care for those nestlings once they've hatched, until those nestlings are ready to be fledged. And then many of our birds, once they're fledged, they're still under parental care. So you can see how this would often be up to 2 months, where the birds really need to have a safe place where they can do this without having someone disturb them. So I did not know before I became a birder that the number one way to look for birds was to listen. And I think about this. I think I was taught this when crossing a street in elementary school. You stop, you look, and you listen. And if I was going to give anyone advice on how to look for birds and especially breeding activity, this is what I suggest. It's first of all, like we tend to move around kind of frenetically and not spend a lot of time just being still. If you want to look for bird breeding activity in your yard or anywhere, I would advise you just to be in one place. You can stand quietly or sit down, but you just want to observe quietly for a number of minutes, especially because your presence in that area might have put some birds on alarm. And so the longer you stay still, the more that it gives them more of a chance to get back to their normal behavior. The second thing you want to do is you want to look and you want to see, you want to look for patterns in bird movement. You want to see, is a particular bird going back and forth to one particular area repeatedly? This is usually kind of a indicator that the bird's got something going on. If it flies up to a certain part of a tree, then you see it later and it flies up to that same part again and again. Also, this is how you determine if the bird is building a nest, is because you'll see the bird carrying nesting material, and I've got a couple pictures of that coming up. And then finally, this was the biggest thing for me to learn, was that so much of noticing the birds around you is by hearing them. Many times we never see the bird, and that can be a little disappointing because it's like, of course you want to see the bird, but the birds don't want to be seen. And so to really kind of get to where they're coming from, you need to listen to them because they give us clues as to what they're doing. They have conversations between themselves. They give alarm calls. They sing either to attract mates or to defend a territory. And then finally, when the nestlings have hatched and they're in the nestlings actually make a lot of noise, and they're quite different than the noises the adult birds make. And so that is a huge tip off for me that there's nestlings around. Now I recognize that it gets a little harder to hear the high pitch of nestlings as we age. And I know that my high range hearing in my left ear is not as good as it is in the right, but you want to be listening for very kind of unusual, almost very determined, kind of frantic sounding squeaky noises. And I've got some recordings of those in a second. Okay, so just some more ideas on what you're going to be looking for. And so in this case, I'm assuming you already know, birds are real, you know what to look for in the when you're looking at a bird. But if you want to determine if the bird is nesting somewhere, here are some tips. So whitewash is a nice term for guano, basically. And if a bird sits in a particular place as either a roosting perch or sometimes under a nest, there will be washes of guano underneath that nest. Now, it might be on the ground, it might be on a rock, it might be on the limbs of the tree. And some birds actually, unfortunately, I'm just realizing I have a great video, but I don't have it queued up. And this is just a little aside. Some nestlings, when they're in the nest, so as not to foul their nest, they actually know to back up to the side of the nest and then do their business over the side. And I know you can find some videos online if you want to, but it's really quite cute actually, but you have to be kind of careful so that you, if you're standing under certain nests, because you might get pooped on. And actually, in anyone who parks in Santa Barbara Harbor, there's a couple of trees that the night herons are renowned for nesting in. And I, one time, was late for a meeting and this like primo parking spot was open. I just pulled into it. I didn't even think about it. And it wasn't until I came out a few hours later that I realized that the reason why that parking spot had been open is that it was under one of these nests and my windshield was completely obscured with guano. And I mean, it was terrible. So depending on the type of bird that's nesting, it can make quite a mess. Okay, so I already mentioned a visual cue as a bird repeatedly flying back and forth into an area. And the picture on the right here, this is a house wren. And I had just been kind of sitting quietly and I noticed this bird just flying back and forth. And like every minute or so, she would fly over this oak tree. And I finally kind of zoomed in with my camera and I realized that she's actually carrying something in her bill. She's got like a very small insect in her bill and she was going into this crack. And then once I could focus in, I could hear the babies actually crying excitedly as she was entering the crack. And then I could hear them basically shutting up as soon as she jammed some food down their beaks. Um, and so that's kind of a satisfying clue that yes, there's a nest of house wrens inside this crack. Um, so a crack in a tree is a good place to look, a hole or a crevice. Sometimes, you might see something up in a tree that looks like a bird nest. It could be, it often is like a squirrel nest if it's quite big and messy looking. I've got a couple pictures of actual bird nests coming up, but it's not nests are not as simple nor as easy to find as one might think from illustrations of a bird nest in a tree. The birds really don't want to be found out. And if they see you around when they're near their nest, I have noticed that they often look kind of nonchalant or they're kind of looking over their shoulders and whistling a little bit. And they're basically waiting for you to leave before they go to their nest. And many times, actually, if they're feeding nestlings and they're carrying food, they will fly all over the place trying to wait for you to move or wait for you to stop looking at them because they don't want to lead you to the nest because they're really thinking about the safety of their babies. And so if you do see a bird that is like kind of repeatedly flying around with something in its bill, but it doesn't appear to be going anywhere in particular, if you step back, maybe 10 feet or so, or look the other direction, that might actually give the bird a chance to feel safe enough to fly towards its nest. And then, if you're still looking out of the corner of your eye, you can kind of key in on where that might be. Okay, so carrying nesting material. This is kind of a big tip off that the bird is doing something. Um, we have here on the left a crow. Crows started carrying sticks around in my neighborhood about 5 weeks ago. Um, and then there is I can't even tell. I think it's an orange-crowned warbler in the right picture that's also carrying nest material, much smaller diameter. The thing to keep in mind though is when the birds start building their nests, they generally use bigger material because they want to get kind of a substructure going for the nest. And then the very last detail on the nest is usually kind of soft, fluffy stuff. I mean, it depends on the type of bird, of course, but if you see a bird carrying something very soft and fluffy, that's most likely to line a nest that's already been made. So that gives you a little bit of an indication where that bird might be in the process of building a nest. And, maybe Mark knows for sure, but it seems to me that it can take the bird, a better part of a week or so to build the nest. Sometimes, though, before like serious nest building happens, there'll be some type of courtship behavior, which I'll mention also in a second. But there'll be birds presenting each other with sticks. There'll be a bird flying around. So just because it has a stick doesn't mean that the nest has already been made, but it's definitely an indication that things are heading that direction. Um, Courtship of birds, and I'm really sorry that I don't have pictures of all of these, but if you want some examples of these, all you have to do is go down to a coffee shop where there's house sparrows on the ground under the cafe tables, because you will see a lot of this behavior in house sparrows just out and about. There's lots of chasing, there's wing fluttering. Sometimes birds will preen each other a little bit. They'll give like a little peck on the bills a little bit. They'll present each other with food and just kind of generally looking cute. So I've seen, I'm not really one to think crows are cute, but I have to say there's a pair of crows in my neighborhood that look very cute sitting on the line together, and they definitely preen each other, and it's pretty obvious that they've got something going on. So what do nests look like? Well, I mean, there's the stereotypical bird nest made of sticks. And then we have nests made of all different types of things. You can see the nest here in the center is made entirely of grasses. And I have to say, I'm not actually sure what kind of bird this is. I found this nest. Sorry. I found this nest out at More Mesa, and it had fallen out, I believe, of a cottonwood tree above me. And so, Mark, if you have any ideas, I'd love to hear that. The nest on the left, could be a cow towhee nest. It's a little misformed. It also had fallen out of a bougainvillea. And then on the right, we have a large stick nest up in a eucalyptus tree. Now, this could be a variety of raptors. It could possibly be a crow nest. It's a little hard to tell from the scale here, but there was not a bird associated with this nest when I took the photo. That doesn't mean that there wasn't a bird lurking around, but sometimes it takes quite a bit of time to figure out what you're actually looking at.
I'd guess a scaly-breasted munia on that.
Oh, for the big one?
Yeah.
And are you thinking because of the plant material down at the bottom?
I'm just the ball-like structure of it and the denseness and the way it's positioned in the tree. It could be, I can't really tell the size for sure, but it looks like it might be this exotic species, munia.
Right, and I've seen a scaly-breasted munia nest in a eucalyptus tree at the parking lot, the lower parking lot at the Riviera Theater. And it was quite a scene actually, because a bunch of them were piling into it right around sunset. Okay, and then finally here on the right, these are cliff swallows, and they are actually, this is unusual because they're actually nesting on a cliff. Mostly we know cliff swallows from nesting under bridges or often under the eaves of buildings, and there's a lot of homeowners associations that are really unhappy when they start to do this. And that's a whole nother topic of conversation. But yeah, I should just say by law, once a bird starts to nest on your building, you cannot disturb it. So just keep that in mind if you are not too fond of swallow nests. It's actually against the law. So let's see. So here's just a few more examples of familiar nests, or things that we might, familiar birds, and also things that you might see around your neighborhood and your yard. So we've got a coast live oak here with a hole in it with another looks like a house wren in that one. There's a stick nest on the upper right, and I know that this was actually a red-shouldered hawk nest from the previous year. It doesn't appear to be occupied right now because I can see there's some spider webs up near the top, and the nest has kind of fallen apart a little bit. And often raptors will reuse their nests from the previous year, and so you can have like the same pair of red-tailed hawks coming back to the same tree year and year and year after year. There's currently, I know there's numerous pairs around town, but out at Elwood Mesa, a couple of right at the end of, oh, where is that? West of Coronado, there was a couple of baby hawks that just hatched out a couple days ago, and that pair has been faithful to that tree for a number of years. The lower left, this is a downy woodpecker in a sycamore, and I'll show you some more of this in a little bit. These birds tend to jump on holes that may be pre-existing from like an old limb scar, and then they will go in and enlarge the hole so that they can use it as a nesting site. And then on the lower right, there actually is a bird in this nest. It's a Pacific slope flycatcher that's now called what? Western flycatcher?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I watched her over the period of a week or so work on bringing nesting material into this. You can see her tail. I don't know if you can see my mouse moving, but her tail's sticking up kind of in the vertical area. Unfortunately, this nest was not successful, and I was sad by this, but I wasn't surprised because this was only about like 7 feet off the ground, right next to a really popular trail. And it might have seemed like a good location initially for the bird, but it just was so heavily trafficked and she really wasn't protected in there at all. Other birds that I see around my neighborhood that you might see in your neighborhood too that are living in cavities are bluebirds, western bluebirds, and then oak titmice will use the holes also. And then in some areas, we still have tree swallows using holes, although they seem to really like bird boxes also. So if there's a bird box option, they might go there rather than finding a naturally occurring hole. So here's another couple, finally, examples of familiar nests. So up on the right, we have a female house finch. They really like nesting around houses. They don't seem to care too much about our comings and goings, and maybe they get some extra protection from being so close to the house. This particular finch actually nested out or successfully raised 3 fledglings, and I have a really great video, which I'm not going to show you because it's kind of long, but of the final nestling leaving the nest. And it was an amazing sight actually to watch this baby bird take flight. Um, so that was really nice. And that's, you know, when you have birds nesting on your house, you get a chance to really see the whole process from the courtship to the nest building all the way through the egg laying and the hatching and finally the babies dispersing. And so some birds like house finches and phoebes and cliff swallows are really, they're pretty tolerant of human activity, and they have seemed to have adapted really readily to using our structures for their nest making. And when we get into looking at the breeding bird study a little later, we can look at how many nests are reported each year on what type of structure. And it's really pretty interesting. So on the bottom right, earlier I showed you pictures of cliff swallows nesting on a cliff. Well, here they are under the eaves of a building. And they're actually really interesting. So they build a mud nest. So they need to have a location where they have water or a certain type of mud that they can pick up and then bring back and kind of daub together. And they will use and rebuild nests from the previous year. Okay, so here's some behaviors to note. And the reason why we're making note of this is not only because it helps you figure out that there's nesting going on, but when we get around to entering data into the birding breed study, this is the kind of information that is really helpful and then can be queried later by researchers. And it's also, you can think of it as evidence to help build your argument that you actually have found a nest and you want to report the nest. So for adult birds, and what I don't have on here, which I should have had on here, is the courtship behavior that I mentioned earlier. So when you see birds courting, well, that is information that can go into the BBS. Carrying nesting material, carrying food for sure. I mean, if you actually see a bird sitting on a nest, which is pretty rare unless it's, a bird right around your house or a large raptor. Some birds do this thing where they carry away the poop from their nestlings so that it doesn't foul the nest. And so you'll actually see the bird leaving from the nest carrying what looks like a little sack of poop, and then they take it off a certain distance, drop it, and then they fly back to the nest. Another behavior that adult birds will do is they'll actively defend a tree or an area from predators. And it kind of depends on how determined the predator is on whether the birds are successful at defending it or not. But you'll often hear like hawks vocalizing and making a lot of noise, or often scrub jays will be making a lot of noise if they see a predator around. Like I know, and I had scrub jays trying to nest in my hedge last year, and every time my little dogs came outside, the scrub jays would be yelling at them. So it was just another indicator of what was going on nearby. Once you actually see young birds, whether you see the birds in the nest or out of the nest, some things behaviors to note are the plumage of the bird. So they don't have their adult feathers right away. They're born naked, and then they start to grow in plumage. And often when we first see the baby birds, they have, I mean, they're pretty funny looking. They can still have little downy feathers. They can often be a completely different color than the adult birds. Like often the raptors will be white, like Cooper's hawks will be whitish. Also, their eye color can be a different color when they're young. If you actually see birds in the nest, often they're standing in the nest before they fledge. In the case of hawks, this is pretty obvious because this is actually often the first indication that there's nestlings in the nest is suddenly you just see them standing there and you're like, where did those things come from? Um, but that's actually called branching. And with hawks, red-tailed hawks in particular, it's really pretty fun if you know where there's a nest to watch them, because you'll see the young hawks kind of jumping around in the nest and then moving out to a limb, and then they start exercising their wings a bit and pumping their wings, and then eventually they make little hops and just little flights from like the nest to surrounding limbs before they're really fully ready to fledge. So this behavior can also give us an indication on the age of the bird, the age of the nestlings, if we didn't know when the eggs were laid initially. And a lot of times you don't know when the eggs were laid, and so we have to kind of back calculate a date based on the behaviors that we see. Begging cries, this is a really key behavior, and this is probably the one you'll hear the most. And what you might know is that you're walking along and you hear this noise coming from a certain spot, and you walk over to it and then it stops. And that's generally because either the parent bird has moved in the nest and the babies stop, or maybe the babies see you and they stop. But that's kind of a giveaway that there's nestlings that are actively hungry and they're begging for food. And then once they're fledged, those young birds will often be making begging cries also. But one behavior that you'll definitely see is fluttering wings, where they just kind of flatten out a little bit and they flutter their wings, and they'll open their bill, and it's called the gape of when they open their bill. And I'm just realizing I didn't put a picture in here specifically, but many birds in their gape is like a yellowy, like an orange or yellow color, and it's almost like giving the adult birds somewhere to aim when they're coming in with their food for their babies. The babies sit in the nest with their mouths open, and you just see kind of like this big, it's like a target with like the outer ring is yellow, and it's like, deposit food here. So here's a couple of indications that these birds have nests with babies. So we've got a song sparrow on the left carrying, it looks like a couple different things. It's kind of hard to tell from this photo what exactly the bird's carrying. But definitely if you look at this woodpecker on the right, this Nuttall's woodpecker is carrying earwigs. And I just have to say, I'm so thankful that somebody eats earwigs. I wish this woodpecker would come to my yard because I have too many in my yard. But an interesting thing that you'll notice is that often the adult bird has multiple insects in its bill. And I don't really know how they do that. They must be holding them with their tongue as they grab another one. But sometimes the bills are so filled with insects that it's just hard to imagine how they're doing it. So here's another couple types of nests I wanted to show you. That the one on the right is a very common bird. This is a bush tit nest. It's a hanging nest. So you could think of it as like a giant sock that's also kind of stretchy, and it's often in oak, coast live oak in this case. And it's attached to a limb up on top, and then the opening is at the top, and then all the birds just kind of pile in. And I wish I could look down inside of one of these just to see whether like the whole thing is filled with babies or whether they've got like a false floor in it or what. I'm not really sure, but you can, it's pretty fun when you see or you hear a bush tit nest, because you can hear the little babies, and then the whole nest will just be quivering because they're so, they're doing a little bit of wing fluttering. And then when the adults kind of come in through the top with the food for the babies just go crazy. On the left, also in a coast live oak, this is a phenopepla. So this is a slightly less common bird to find nesting in our area. But she was sitting very, very still. She's the black object in the middle. And it took it took a lot of my effort to actually find this nest. And the way that I found it is that I observed the male bird carrying food. And I just saw him. I was like, oh, look, a phenopepla. And then I looked through my binoculars and he was carrying some food in his bill. And I thought, I wonder where he's going with that. So I just kind of sat quietly and I watched, and he flew about 30 yards away to this tree. And then after, 30 seconds or so, he came back out and started foraging again. So after I watched him a couple times, I was able to key in on the specific limb that the bird was going to. And then I moved a little closer, and then I had my zoom on my camera, and I was able to zoom in finally and see the nest. Okay, so here's 3 more examples for behaviors that you might see. So the big picture here, these are barn owls, and these are birds that have left their nest, but they are hanging out together. And so this is something you'll often see with nestlings or fledglings, is they fledge, but when they're still under parental care, they stick together. And the reason how I came about finding these barn owls is that I had been walking my dog through the neighborhood the previous evening, and I heard the sound of begging barn owl babies. And I actually heard it 2 nights in a row. And then finally I thought, I got to go look in the daytime and figure out where these birds are. And so sure enough, here they were sitting in a palm tree, right, maybe 15 meters away from the sidewalk. And it was interesting actually at night when I heard them begging. They're quite loud. And I actually saw an adult barn owl fly in from overhead. It was dark, but I saw the bird go overhead. And then the feeding noise the begging noise got very loud. And then suddenly one of them shut up and the other one was still begging. And that's when I knew that the adult had just brought in enough food for one of the babies. And it was kind of sad actually that one of them got to eat and the other one hadn't eaten yet. And then, the adult went off to forage to feed the second one. So another behavior you might see if you look in the upper right, these are kingbirds, and this is a good example of looking at the gape of a fledgling. The birds will basically stand around with their mouths wide open, just waiting for someone to stuff food down there, especially if they see their parent flying nearby, and the parent was just out of the frame of this picture coming in with some food. And then there's another Nuttall's woodpecker on the bottom, and this is a hole in kind of on the side of this large oak limb, and this woodpecker is coming in with a mouthful of insects. Okay, so I'm just going to give you just a few examples of a couple specific types of birds that you may see in your yard, and I have them here in my yard. And I mean, they're all over. This is one of the most common birds you'll see around town. This is the dark-eyed junco. They eat basically almost everything. They eat, they plant material and they eat insects. They forage mostly on the ground. They're sparrows, so they're going to be doing lots of kind of poking around on the ground, jumping around a little bit in the grass. They're here in our area during the non-breeding season also. So these are resident birds, or at least the species is resident. But then during the breeding season, their diet goes to more than 50% insects. So they are really trying to go for those high value prey items so that they can have the energy to lay their eggs, raise their babies. And I included a little information here on the feeding behavior. So this comes from studies where people just sat and watched the birds and did like a time budget of how long they took doing all these different activities. And this is actually interesting if you're thinking about planting plants in your yard that are going to be producing insects to feed these birds. They're actually spending, it looks like about 80% of their time up in the bushes or in the vegetation themselves getting insects. And then 20% of that time is down picking in the litter below the trees. And so I think this is the feeding behavior during breeding season. I've got a few examples of plants that might help provide them food. And a note here about the chenopodium, which is also a really good host plant for insects too. Lepidoptera. So here's a picture of a fledgling dark-eyed junco, and this is from my yard. And they're pretty easy to recognize as a juvenile. They don't have the dark heads, and they've got this kind of speckling little speckles underneath that go away as they get older. Here's a dark-eyed junco nest. They tend to nest on the ground or very low to the ground. And so this makes them very, very vulnerable to household pets and also to any type of yard maintenance that might be like weed whacking or trimming away very low vegetation. They're extremely vulnerable. Incubation period 12 days and then another 12 to 13 days to fledge. So in all, it looks like it's about 5 to 6 weeks of time that these birds need from once the eggs are laid to after until they're not under parental care anymore. And here I'm going to show you an example of a dark-eyed junco nest that I actually found in the garden at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. My finger is pointing, if you look below my finger, there's a little dark gap in the iris. And it looks like hummingbird sage here. And if you look over on the right, I zoomed in with my camera and it was hard to take a picture just because it was so dark in there, but buried in amongst all of the iris thatch and material, there was a dark-eyed junco nest with at least, I think, 3 baby birds in there. So, when you're just thinking about landscaping, I mean, this is a really vulnerable situation for these birds. They really don't want any type of, like cleaning up of dead material or anything like that during the months of late April, May into June. And then here are a couple examples from my yard. And in this case, I heard the juvenile dark-eyed junco, and then sure enough, I could see in the distance, here's a male in the distance that is foraging. And now I'm going to try something. I'm going to click on this link. This is the sound of juvenile juncos begging. So let's see if this works. Can people hear that?
No, we can't hear. You might have needed to toggle to share computer audio when you selected the sharing
Oh no,
settings.
shoot.
So you could stop share and then reshare, and as you reshare, there should be a button, a box to click share computer audio.
Aha, share sound. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. I learned something new. Okay, let's see how good everyone's upper range hearing is. Is that working?
Affirmative.
Okay, so the squeaking noise is what you're looking for. That is the sound of baby birds. And there's many sparrows and other small birds make a squeaky noise very similar to this. It can be hard to hear if it's a noisy environment, but I found that in noisy environments, actually the birds tend to squeak louder. I just want to kind of quickly move on here to a couple other birds you might see in your yard. So I'd like to talk about orioles really quickly. They're not here year round. These are migratory songbirds that come up from Central America, Southern Mexico, Central America, top of South America, and they come specifically here to breed. They are nectaring. I have ones that come to my hummingbird feeder, and then they also are picking off insects that they find and fruits that they find in shrubs in the trees. They're never going to be on the ground. So they are mostly eating insects during breeding season. Couple facts here. Yeah, so it says in summer and late summer, I mean, it's like 100% of their diet basically is insects. There's a couple of plants here suggested that they might like. And let me just move on to a picture. Oriole nests are amazing. The females, they weave them from grass threads that they collect. So they strip off from leaves and bark, and they knit together these incredible hanging nests. around here in my neighborhood, they tend to be nesting in palm trees, but I've also seen them in sycamores, cottonwoods, willows. They're known. Oh, there's one I've seen up at Barone Ranch that nests in a yucca. In general, the nests are 10 to 15 feet off the ground. They're usually on the underside so that you can't see them. They're quite difficult to see. Um, Here's a couple pictures of a nest that I found in my neighborhood after someone had cut the dead palm leaves off their palm tree. And I pulled the nest back a little bit so you can see that the opening to the nest is right up against the underside of the leaf. So it's really hard to tell, like you don't see the bird go in and out, they just go up and then suddenly they're in the nest. And then the picture on the right shows how the female bird really sews the nest together. I mean, it's incredible. She winds these threads around other branches. She pokes holes through, like she's got a, using her bill as a needle. It's really amazing. And I have another, oh, I thought I had an audio. Shoot, I don't know what happened to that. Oh, here it is. Okay. And here's a fledgling hooded oriole that was in my mallow last year. And you can see this is a very popular plant with the orioles, and they pick a lot of bugs off of this plant that they feed. This baby was under parental care for at least a week right outside my window, my office window. And so I could watch the adults gleaning from, and I think they were getting leaf hoppers actually, but gleaning small leaf hoppers and other bugs and then feeding this baby. There were two babies actually. So let's try this for. So yeah, there was a bunch of background noise on that recording, but they make kind of a chattering noise, which is reminiscent of the adults, but it's way more run together and faster and more incessant. And I think that's really kind of a clue is that, at least what I've noticed for baby birds, for begging birds, is that they're hungry. They're really hungry and they make a lot of noise, and they get more and more desperate as time goes on, waiting for their parents to come back with food. Okay, finally, I think this is the last one I have. Anna's hummingbirds, these are year-round resident birds. And I was actually surprised to learn that the majority of their food is small flying insects. They do nectar, of course, but they eat a ton of gnats. I mean, maybe not a ton per bird, but they eat a lot. They eat a lot of gnats, and then they're feeding both nectar and the gnats or the insects to their young. A number of native plants are important for them. Predominantly, their nests tend to be in coast live oak, but also in ornamental plants. And they are also going to need a couple of months, even though they're so small. They still need a couple of months to get from the nest, the egg, to fledging. Well, because they're fed afterwards. They're under parental care afterwards. So here's Anna's hummingbird on the left. And you can just kind of barely see they stick a lot of lichen onto their nest, and often you'll see the adult carrying lichen. And I just want to mention that on the right, this is a hummingbird nest that's being built currently in one of the eucalyptus trees that was just planted at the Butterfly Grove out at Elwood, the Coronado Preserve, or the Elwood Preserve. And as I was standing out there with someone from the city of Goleta last week, I noticed that a hummingbird was coming in with nesting material, and she went right here and building her nest. And this was about 7 or maybe 8 feet off the ground in a very small eucalyptus sapling. Okay, so I think before I get any far, I think that, well, the next step here is we're going to talk about the breeding bird study. We'll show you how to enter data, and then we're going to go through kind of a dive into what the ways to actually explore the data are, which is probably the most interesting part of all of this for you. And so I'll be turning that over to Mark in just a second, but I just want to say, are there any questions so far on what I've gone through? Okay. So, I am going to go, oh, and I'm going to say too, I have some resources, some websites, that I'll share at the end. I am going to, stop sharing my screen because then I've got to go into one more window for the bird breeding study. So just bear with me for a second here. But first I am going to show you a really cool, let's see, let me share this again. Okay, so I'm glad I enabled audio. This is, can people see this video that shows a tree?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I was walking out at El Capitan State Beach through the sycamore forest, and I heard a noise, and I was like, what is that noise? And I started to finally to walk towards the noise. And after a little while, I discovered the noise was coming from the hole in this tree. And it took me quite a while to find it because there's a bunch of branches in the foreground that are not visible in this video. But I sat there for long enough until I discovered it was actually a downy woodpecker because I saw the downy woodpecker adult fly in and deliver food. So I'm just going to play this short video for you. Oh, wait, could you hear that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I enabled, okay, I just want to make sure the sound is enabled. Okay. Yeah, okay. So
Very cool.
yeah, I love the fact that the bird gets more and more incessant. He's like, where are you? He finally just like sticks his whole cute little head out. Okay, and so I mean, this behavior is going on right now all around us. It's really fun to go and listen and look for it. Um, I am going to share one more thing here. Um, okay. All right. So can everyone see Santa Barbara Audubon Society website?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. So if you go to our website, there's a number of ways to get to this link. Up at the top, if you go under what we do, it goes to Santa Barbara County Breeding Bird Study. That's the BBS. And currently, this is a collaboration with folks over at the Cheadle Center for Biological Restoration, CBER at UCSB. And they've enabled us to use these nice maps. So what I'm going to do right now is just show you how to actually submit your data. And then what Mark is going to do is going to take us through exploring the data. And there's a new front end way to do that. You can explore the data through this old version for now, but we have a new face called Bird View, which is really exciting because it's much more flexible and easy to query than this way is. So I'm just going to first show you online data submittal. So we would come on here, we'd click here. If you have any questions, email Mark, don't email me. And then you're faced with a form where you're going to fill out a bunch of questions. So for common name, and I'm going to do this right now for a bird that I saw in my neighborhood. So you can pick it from this pull down list, or you can type, and it was a Western, oh, maybe I can't do it that way. Okay, Western bluebird. And now map and coordinates of observation. So you can enter your Latin lawn if you know it. And this is generally the way that I often do this. But if you don't know the Latin lawn, you can zoom along on the map here until you zoom in and find it. So I didn't have the Latin lawn queued up. So we're just going to go right into the urban neighborhood where I saw this observation. And
Jesse,
Yeah.
enlarge the map.
Oh, right like that.
Your lower,
No,
lower left. Yeah,
this?
no, above
No.
that. Uh,
Ah, sorry, I'm clicking too much. Right
yeah,
here. There
there
we
you go.
go.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
Yep.
This is why I invited you. Okay. All right, so we are going right along here to the street called Alondra, and there is a dead tree right here, which still looks like it's living in this photo. I don't know when this photo was taken. In this dead tree, I witnessed a bluebird going in and out of a hole. Okay, so now I've got my pin set, so now I'm going to make it smaller, right? So I can see the rest of the form. So that's my location, and it's filled out Latin lawn. Okay, location certainty in meters. Well, I'm gonna say, I'll just say 5 meters just because I'm not sure I zoomed in on exactly the right branch. And this is if you actually have a ways of getting location while you're at the place that's actually can be better than trying to zoom in on a blurry map. So now locality. So I am going to give the information from general to specific. So this is going to be Goleta. I'm going to say Old Town. And then, oops, and then I'm going to say Alondra. And this is often where Mark will write me back and say, well, actually, I'd prefer you to say Goleta Valley, comma, Goleta, comma, Old Town. So if you do submit data, expect that there will be some back and forth between you and Mark or potentially other people, because they really want to know specific, be able to really key in on where you saw it. But then these search terms are also important for if you're searching for a bird, like so let's say we want to look at all the Western bluebirds in Goleta, it's like, well, putting in Goleta may be important too. Okay, so observation details, I would say adult going in and out of a cavity. You have to be succinct here or Mark will edit for you. And then you can say the comment, I'm going to say bird flew to wire when I approached and basically refused to go back to the tree while I was standing there. And then the date of observation. So it has this handy calendar for you. And this was Tuesday. And then you find your name under here. And I don't even know if I'm in here, Mark. Look at that. He
You
doesn't
will
have
be
me in there.
soon.
Ha, I see. This is what happens if you don't continue to enter your observations. He drops you. So you put your name in, and then if there's someone else with you, you want to put your email address in so then he can pester you with details. And then I don't know what kind of tree it was. It might have been a walnut. And then how many meters off the ground was it? And I am going to say 4 meters off the ground. I do not currently have a photo, but you can then take a photo later and submit the photo to Mark that's associated with this breeding observation. If you did have a photo, you would drag it in right here. So just like that, my data was submitted successfully, and I will personally get an email saying that the data has been submitted, and it gives me an observation number. And then in the future, if I have additional observations associated with this this nest or this area, I make sure that I have that observation linked to the new observations so that we don't have like 50 different records of 50 different bluebirds in the same tree when it was actually only one. Okay, so that's it, just like that. I've submitted my data. So now I think what we're gonna do is go to Mark and we are gonna say, well, now what? So we've submitted a bunch of data, but perhaps we're actually interested before we even submit data. We're interested in seeing what kind of birds are in our area, or maybe we're really curious about pick a bird, any bird. We're curious about that particular bird. We want to see what's going on in Santa Barbara County. So, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Jessie. And I think that was a brilliant presentation you just gave, and I'm glad that it was recorded. And I don't think very many people know that if Jessie had been asked to give a presentation about the offshore underwater fauna or flora, she would do an equally eloquent presentation. She's one of the few biologists who are really comfortable above ground and underwater. And
Well,
so I think she's a
yeah.
real asset to our community, and certainly I've learned a lot from her.
Yeah, thank you. I'd still be talking if we were talking about eelgrass or kelp beds. So,
Yeah. So
wait, I see that there's a hand. Oh, there's a hand raised.
Yeah.
How do we want to do? Let's see.
I think it's
No,
a cheering
no,
emoji.
that was a clap.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Okay.
And I don't know how to turn it off. There.
Okay.
Okay.
You can just keep clapping. Okay. Okay.
So I would begin by saying that we have a new tool in town, and it's just very exciting to be able to share this with you in this venue, and we'll do a screen share in just a moment. But I want to introduce you in general to the breeding bird study, which is the objectives of which are to try to bring together information about birds and to ask, give the information, bring the information about breeding birds together in all parts of the county to facilitate explorations of all the relationships of birds to land. And since all birds breed on the land, essentially. These explorations can inform so many different levels of our community: for educators, conservation biologists, school children, birder moms, education, environmental planners, regulatory agencies. There's just a way to tap this information that's really interesting. One intent of the breeding bird study is to distinguish breeding from nesting. And so breeding is essentially what happens before nesting, and then after nesting. And if you have a failure at any one of those 3 points, you're going to not have the outcome that you had expected and what we all wish for, which is successful rearing of the offspring to independence. Jessie did a wonderful job of explaining the different behaviors that one can look at. And I just want to mention one more, and that is the behavior of the birds that you're watching, especially from this time of year onwards. When you see 2 birds together and one of them is highly focused, highly directed, intent upon whatever it's doing, its activity, that stands in often strong contrast to the appearance of the offspring, which is dumb, unfocused, and really without direction, waiting for food and nothing more. And
Let's say naive.
Yeah,
Not
naive.
dumb.
Yeah, naive. That's much better. Thank you. But this contrast in behaviors is easily noticeable. From that, you might then recognize some plumage differences, as Jessie showed in the juncos, but most birds show some elements of plumage difference. Also, the texture of the feathers is often very different, and you can see that most readily on the undertail area of a bird, where the feathers are really very lax and ill-formed, and they disappear quickly as the bird matures. So if I can share a screen now, we can show you how this new tool works. And let me know if you can see my screen.
I see it.
Thank you. So before we talked, we looked at this idea of a bird that I saw today, which was the Say's phoebe breeding in the Central Valley. And we were able to look at this idea of how birds have made a transition from natural habitats, which we assume was the condition before human beings arrived in North America, to the situation we are now. And this display looks at, first of all, that we're in Santa Barbara County, which is the only county in North America where a breeding bird study of this kind operates. And we've chosen our data, the breeding bird study, because because BirdView does more than one thing. It can look at eBird checklists, and as a way to focus on eBird checklists, it's just marvelous. It shows both the land and sea distribution of birds that have been detected and submitted to eBird. But we're interested in the breeding bird study, so we'll go back here and not choose eBird checklist, but go down to the Santa Barbara breeding bird study, and now we'll see that land is the only source of breeding information. We looked at Say's Phoebe, but we'll now look at the idea of what do nests look like? Or what do baby birds look like? And there's some techniques that we can use to do that. One of the things that Jessie didn't emphasize that we could look at right now is that maybe a third of the birds in the breeding bird study are accompanied by photos. So if you see something and you want to confirm what it was, you can refer to this really very large supply of bird photos. You can see up here in the breeding bird study that we have 13,078 records currently in the breeding bird study. And if we wanted to look at those birds only for which photographs are attached, we go over to this button here where it says media, and we click on media, and we'll get another number, 3,044 records. Well, what is that? About 28% of the records have photos attached to them. Well, let's say that we think we've got an oak titmouse no, let's take a nest. Let's say we think we have a warbling vireo. Well, let's test our idea and put in the 4-letter code for warbling vireo, choose warbling vireo. And now we have a display of those records of warbling vireo, only those records that are accompanied by a photo. Well, let's see what the situation is. We go over to breakdown, where we can get a further refinement of our records. And in breakdown, we choose what is the nest substrate that is shown. And we find, well, here we have photos that we can look at of western sycamore. Let's take a look at that. Notice that when I hold the cursor over western sycamore, those records, those dots on the map get larger. If I go down to Coast Live Oak, we see that dot getting larger. If I go to California Bay, etc. Let's look at the nest photos in western sycamore. We go to open a record by clicking on the green dot, and we see that we've got a photo here with a question mark. We click on that photo, and there we have an example of the nest of warbling vireo. So that's what their nest placement and nest structure looks like. So you can test your hypotheses by going to the photos archive that's associated with this breeding bird study.
Yeah, and if I could say, Mark, this is a great example because this photo clearly shows the adult bird's head, the important part of the head of the bird that makes this bird a warbling vireo.
Right.
Yeah, so that's key.
Yeah. Let's look at another one that's in western sycamore up here. Warbling vireo, western sycamore, click on the photo image, and there you get another example of the nest of warbling vireo. So the BBS can not only show you where, when, and how they may be using our environment, but it can show you photographically. Let's say a researcher wants to study the difference between the nest structure of Anna's hummingbird and Alan's hummingbird. They can look very similar. We can go back to the breeding bird study page, get rid of the existing image, uh, get rid of other things here, for instance, Western sycamore and warbling vireo. And we could do Allen's hummingbird. And let's try something fancy here. Let's do Anna's hummingbird, comma, Anna's hummingbird. Well, look what we get. On the right side of the screen, we get two columns that show both sets of data. So we did Allen's hummingbird, comma, Anna's hummingbird, and here it shows up on the right side if we wanted to look at the nest substrates. So we've got lots of records of Anna's and Allen's hummingbird.
Wait,
Let's look at how many.
wait. Don't leave that one, Mark.
Okay.
I just said, look at that. There's not that much there's some overlap on what species they go for, but then look at all the types of trees and plants that Anna's nest in that Allen's don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Thank you for picking those.
Yeah. If we wanted to look at one of them and realize you don't have to know the 4-letter code, you could just type Allen's and it'll give you the option of choosing Allen's. And let's get rid of the photo requirement. Click that off. And how many records of Allen's hummingbird nesting or breeding do we have? 93 records. And many of those records, if we look at where they place their nests, many of the records, 32 to be precise, are not associated with nests. So we have we're documenting some other aspect of the breeding cycle other than the nesting phase. So now we're focused on nesting.
Well, wait, can I ask a question? Sorry.
Yep.
How do you know that that is not just that someone didn't write in what type of substrate the nest is in?
How do you know if it's a question mark, in somebody's thinking?
Well, if it says none nest substrate, is that because the person didn't know what kind of tree it was nesting in, so they left it blank?
No, that would show up as an unknown.
Ah, good. Okay.
And but none means this was a breeding record that was not dependent upon the nesting phase of the breeding cycle. In other words,
yeah, thank you.
An adult was found feeding a young, and we don't know where the nest was. That is included in the none category. But these are ordinated from most frequent nest structures to least frequent nest structures. But the hummingbirds are notorious for their diversity, of their non-particularity about where they place their nests. They don't care if it's native, if it's non-native, and they'll place their nests anywhere that's suitable for them. I want to mention that it's so interesting, this relationship that we're forming with between the Audubon Society and the Bot Garden. With the breeding bird study, we can pinpoint the times birds need foods of a particular type. Knowledge at the Bot Garden can pinpoint the best plants that serve the species likely to breed at those times in your area. So I really like this institutional symbiosis that has developed between our two groups. Neither organization can do this alone, but it's this union that I think we have now a framework to explore, which is going to be very interesting. So let's do something else here. I'll erase this display by going to none. And let's get rid of Anna's hummingbird, Allen's hummingbird over here. And we want to know what birds breed in your area. And that might be the first thing that we investigate. So let's zoom in a little bit and choose an area. Let's say, for example, Lower Mission Canyon. We can use this tool here called the Area Search Tool. And notice whenever I drag my cursor over any element in bird view, it tells you what that element does. Which is very cool. So it's sort of self-instructive. If you want more information on how to use bird view, you can go here for a fuller set of instructions. And Steve has an even more complete uh, lesson setup that where you can actually read more in more detail what's going on. So I've chosen an area, and I don't see where it is right now. So let's do it again. But okay, I'll choose the area search tool there, and we'll look at some of my records aren't showing up here. Wonder why. What's happening here? Let's just reboot this thing. This for just to get all the records back. There we go. Let's zoom into the lower Mission Canyon area. Here we are. We use the area search tool up here. Click on that. Click on the area of interest and drag this rectangle so that we're covering all the records, all the breeding bird records in this area. And release. And so now all we'll see are these records in this area. We can then go to breakdown and look at, well, what species are asked, what species are breeding in this area? We go down to species under breakdown, and we get a nice list of those species ordered from most frequent records to least frequent submitted breeding bird records. So if you live in this area, this allows you to see a profile of the birds most likely in your area. But it should be noted that this is a function of where birders and ornithologists have gone to gather records. This is not an absolute gospel statement of all the birds that breed in this area. This is just where birders have chosen to go. And that's the citizen science aspect of this breeding bird study, that it relies on the initiative of people rather than a structured design which actual science would provide us. But we do get a good first glimpse of what might be breeding in our area. And again, you drag your cursor over any of these names and those dots highlight for those species. Kind of cool. And if we wanted to look at a particular species, like let's choose Black Phoebe, we click on Black Phoebe, and that goes over and shows up here on the left side of the screen. And so now we're seeing the 4 records of Black Phoebe. And we can look at those in any detail that we want, and to see what kind of a record was involved, or other aspects of this. Jessie, how does this inform us with regard to what we might do with the bot garden?
Well, I just also wanted to mention, that reminded me, I don't think we mentioned this earlier, is that Mark and I are going to be leading an in-person bird walk at the Bot Garden on May 17th at the height of Bird Fest to look for signs of bird breeding. And everyone's welcome to join us, and we'll see what we can find up there. So I forgot to mention that earlier. Scott might mention that, but I just wanted to put that out there. As far as the kind of collaboration between native plants and birds and breeding records, I don't know, maybe Scott can chime in here as to the extent that records have been entered from the garden, and that garden membership knows about this other than from our presentation. Oh, sorry, I have my
Yeah,
video.
happy to chime in here. I think, the first step, as Mark mentioned, is it's hard for us to do any analysis with a lack of data. And unfortunately, there aren't as many observations as we would like to see in the Botanic Garden. So I think in some ways, this is a call to action for folks who are members, volunteers, staff, supporters of the Botanic Garden to really pay attention to breeding bird activity in the garden, and please use the breeding bird study to record it so we can better understand how to analyze that data and how it might inform our work as a horticultural institution.
I think
Yeah.
that there's
Oh,
one thing that I could add to that is that places like what is the lady's name who has the herbarium in Montecito?
Lotus Land.
Lotus Land and the Bot Garden, their intentions are plants rather than birds. So sometimes maintenance occurs that is a little bit counterproductive to birds. So we'll scout out first what we think is going on at the Bot Garden, and maybe staff can help us by setting aside certain areas or staying away from certain areas where they know breeding is going. But this raises a larger issue that Audubon has tackled, and that is that to really allow breeding to happen near your yard, there is one obstacle that we have that we might want to resolve, and that is that many neighbors of our neighbors have maintenance companies coming in and doing this work with heavy equipment. This has largely eliminated some of the breeding birds in our neighborhoods. Some, maybe 50 years ago, when we operated with brooms and rakes and trimmers, hand trimmers, that's not the case now, that everything is electric and high powered and noisy. So one thing we have toyed with is how to ask our maintenance companies to kind of withhold their maintenance during the critical period of bird breeding, or how to ask your neighbors to renegotiate their arrangement with the land management company to give the breeding birds a chance to breed. We haven't really pursued this. There are problems. We don't want to have lost income for these land management companies, but it's important to notice that they do work against some of our objectives of trying to have more breeding and more feeding going on in our neighborhoods. So the choice of where you put the plants relative to your neighbors, the choice of whether you do it all at all on your property, given the maintenance that goes on around, is an important thing to think about as you choose the plants.
Yeah, Mark, I'm glad you brought that up because I think Scott has something to share on that regard. Scott, can you talk briefly about the California Native Plant Landscaper certification?
Yeah, absolutely. It was on the tip of my tongue. And exactly these maintenance practices, both for wildlife and just for the longevity of California native plants, are something that kind of interestingly aren't part of the average lexicon or best practices for most landscape gardeners in our region. So, Santa Barbara Botanic Garden has been delivering the California Native Plant Landscaper certification, which is a 19-hour training developed by California Native Plant Society and Theodore Payne Foundation, which talks all about how to best manage California native plants, both for their own longevity, but also for habitat. And I'm happy to say that we have had Jessie attend our lectures and talk specifically about maintenance for birds and training these landscape professionals and major enthusiasts to identify potential bird breeding behavior, understand where the bird breeding and nesting habitat is in the landscapes they maintain, and an understanding of the critical timing for ensuring the success of these nests. So it's slow but sure, but we already have, we're now pushing 120 graduates of CMPLC in the last 2 years. And these include people from City of Isla Vista, City of Santa Barbara County. So these aren't, just homeowners or gardeners that manage 2 or 3 yards. In some cases, these are people that are managing pretty large open spaces within our municipal areas.
Hmm. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, that's great, Scott. I wanted to see whether anyone has any questions for Mark or me or Scott for that matter on bird view or the breeding bird study.
There is a comment in the chat about the maintenance of bird boxes, and are they something that should be cleaned annually, or do you leave last year's nesting material in the box?
Yeah.
It's a good question, and Jesse may have a different opinion than I do, but I suggest that they get quite cluttered and they get dirty, and so they can be cleaned out. The problem I currently have with a nest box over my house is that it got colonized by honeybees. So I've got a real problem on my hand that I'm not about to go up there and remove the honeybees. So I'm going to have to wait until next year to do anything about that. But nest boxes are helpful, but I think it's more interesting to look at more closely at the environment around you and try to figure out what are the natural opportunities for birds to breed. Nest boxes are great assistance to if you have an endangered species or a threatened species or a species that you want to whose populations you want to rebuild locally. That can be very helpful. An example is tree swallows along the South Coast. They nest freely in nest boxes, and we now have a large population of tree swallows on the South Coast, but they won't nest in natural cavities. So that's kind of curious, but nest boxes allow us to enjoy the presence of tree swallows, whereas we wouldn't otherwise have them.
Yeah, and I would just add to what Mark was saying is that we have birds like tree swallows and western bluebirds nesting in areas that maybe traditionally were more forested and had old trees with cavities in them, or places where limbs had broken off so that the birds could find a nest site. But now under the kind of climate regime that we're in, where with good concern, I mean, good reason, people are concerned about fire risks from standing or even fallen dead tree material, there's fewer and fewer places for these cavity nesters to go. Actually, the city of Goleta has been fairly good out at Lake Los Carneros in keeping some standing dead trees, mainly because people, including Audubon supporters, have pointed out the various woodpeckers and other things that are living in there. Yes, bird boxes should be cleaned out every year. I know that in places where there's actual banding work and studies going on, where the people maintaining the boxes have a permit with Federal Fish and Wildlife Service and Cal State, I guess it's Cal Fish and Wildlife, to handle birds, because you have to have a permit to do that. They go in and they clean out the boxes regularly, and they also make sure that there's material in there to kill off any mites too. But I know we're just right up against our time here. It looks like Mark's got 2 more graphs for us. Did you want to show these quickly, Mark, before we
Yeah, I just wanted to explain what the breeding bird study can provide in terms of pinpointing the exact period that birds breed in our county. And it may be different in other places in North America. So if you were, for instance, trying to attract Buick's wren, you could pinpoint the exact times that they are feeding their young, with the Botanic Garden's knowledge of what plant species are providing insects that are desirable by Buick's wrens at that time, we can pinpoint, match the plants to the species of birds that we wish to assist. Here's another example with downy, where we've plotted both the phenology of downy and hairy woodpeckers, the downy in blue. And so you can see that they largely overlap in terms of their needs. But again, we can choose the period in which their needs are greatest for feeding kids and provide those kinds of insects. So these are just examples of phenologies that the breeding bird study can provide for any species with a large enough number of records, and come to a really good understanding of when their needs are greatest and match the plants to those.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I just want to give you a real shout out here, because you've really been doing the brunt of the work for the bird breeding study and really carrying the torch for pushing it out into the public view, and I'm very appreciative of that. Yeah, thank you. It's amazing, like almost what 14,000 records and counting.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a very impressive study.
thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say finally, I forgot to put up a couple, and if I could just, I know. Oh, Mark, can you unshare for a
Yep.
second? I just want to quickly
Mhm.
put up the page that has some websites on it, and then I think we're going to be done. Let's see. Is this me? Share. Slideshow. Let me go to the end very quickly, if I can go quickly. I know that we just mentioned several different locations. So I have, of course, you know, the Botanic Gardens website. I have Santa Barbara Audubon's website on here. I have the link for the bird breeding study, which I mentioned for data entry. The bird view overlay that Mark was showing us is found at this particular website, and we can if people are interested, we can give you a good hyperlink for that. I can give that to Scott, but the creator of the website, his own web page is membot.com. So if you see that later, it's not an actual bot that's trying to infect your computer. All About Birds is a really good website from Cornell University to help with identifications, and there's sound and all types of good geographical information on there. eBird, of course, is good. And if you want to learn to identify the birds in your yard by sound, Merlin is an excellent app because it listens, and it's fairly accurate, with some occasional standout, really weird, weird errors, but for the most part, it's really helpful. And then finally, if you really get into listening to birds, there's a website called xenocanto.org, and it has recordings of birds from all over the world where you can listen to, I mean, anything, flight songs, dawn songs, calls, breeding, attraction singing, feeding, just all kinds of things. So that's a really good resource, and I recommend going there if you've got some time. All right. And I promised you guys we'd end early, and I thought it was going to be earlier than 2 minutes early, but thanks for sticking with us. And I'll turn it
Thank
back over
you.
to Scott.
Yeah, thank you all so much. We will post this recording once it's available, and we look forward to seeing you at the garden. I did drop links for the various websites, the data submittal site and the data view site are in the chat here. Um, so you can access those if you're interested. Have
Thank
a
you,
great night,
Scott.
everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
All
Thank you,
right.
Jessie.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
Mark.
much. Okay. Bye.